Welcome to the deep dive. We often talk about firewall software, all that tech stuff for security. But today, we're looking at something, well, absolutely fundamental,
Yeah.
sometimes maybe overlooked: people.
Yes, exactly. The human element.
We're diving into Clause 6 of the ISO IEC 2702.2022 standard. It's all about what they call people controls.
Precisely. And it's so critical. You can have like the most advanced tech defenses, but if the people aren't considered, well, you've got a major gap.
Huge vulnerability, yeah.
So Clause 6 gives us these guidelines for managing the risks that come with, the individuals in an organization. Think of it like building a human security layer.
Okay.
And our goal today for this deep dive is really to walk you through each of these controls, step by step, almost like we're your instructors for this bit of the standard.
Right, so people can really get what's needed and, importantly, why it's needed.
Exactly. So let's kick off with the very first one in Clause 6. It's 6.1, screening.
Okay, screening. Now, when you first hear that, it sounds, well, maybe a bit basic, like just a quick background check. Is there more to it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the core idea is straightforward.
Yeah.
Make sure the people you're bringing in are, suitable,
Mhm.
eligible, trustworthy.
Right.
But it's suitability based on applicable laws, regulations, ethics, even your own business requirements.
Oh, okay.
And crucially, it needs to be proportional. The level of screening should match the kind of information they'll access and the potential risks tied to that role.
So not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And it applies broadly, full-time, part-time, temporary staff.
Temps too, okay.
Yep. And even individuals working through your suppliers. If they're handling your info, your supplier agreements need to cover their screening too.
That makes sense. Need that consistency. And is this just like a pre-employment thing?
That's a really key point. The standard says it should happen before someone joins, definitely.
Like day one.
Right. But it also explicitly mentions it can be ongoing. Periodic checks might be needed.
Why long?
Well, things change, right? Roles evolve, responsibilities shift. Maybe someone moves into a more sensitive position. So periodic checks can be really important, especially for those critical roles.
Gotcha. So what kinds of screening activities are we actually talking about here?
Well, for basically everyone, you're looking at confirming identity, checking references. That's kind of the baseline.
Standard stuff.
Yeah. But then, depending on the role, especially if it involves sensitive data, financial, personal health info.
Right, the really confidential thing.
Exactly. Then you might need more detailed checks, things like credit history reviews, maybe criminal record checks.
Okay.
And the standard actually specifically calls out verifying competence and trustworthiness for people going into dedicated InfoSec roles.
Makes perfect sense. You need to trust your security people implicitly.
You really do. It sounds obvious, but having it written down like this formalizes it. It underscores the importance.
So for these different levels of checks, how do you actually, do it? Are there strict rules?
The standard emphasizes having clear procedures. You need to define the criteria for these checks.
Criteria
Like who does the screening, how exactly do they do it, when, and importantly, why is a certain level of check needed for that specific role?
Okay, so document everything.
Pretty much. It helps ensure fairness, consistency, and, critically, that you're staying within legal boundaries. There are often laws about what info you can collect and use for background checks. You have to be careful there.
Yeah, that's a really big one. Don't want to violate privacy rights accidentally.
Yeah.
What happens if, say, you can't get all the screening done before someone absolutely has to start? Does that happen?
It definitely can, and the standard gives guidance. It talks about using mitigating controls.
Mitigating controls, so like what?
Basically, temporary measures to lower the risk until the full screening is done. Could be delaying their full access, maybe not giving them a company laptop right away, restricting access to certain systems.
So limiting their potential impact until they're fully vetted.
Exactly. Or in some cases, if the later checks raise serious red flags, it could even mean, well, terminating employment.
Wow, okay. So it's a risk-based thing,
Yeah.
balancing the need to get someone working against the security risk.
Precisely. And you mentioned ongoing checks earlier.
Yeah. How often should those happen?
Well, the standard doesn't give like a fixed schedule. It says the frequency depends on the criticality of the role and the associated risks.
So more critical role, potentially more frequent checks.
That's the idea, just ensuring continued suitability for those key positions.
Okay, that really paints a clearer picture of screening. It's definitely more involved than just glancing at a CV.
Much more, yeah. It's a foundational control.
Right. So let's move on to the next one in Clause 6. This is 6.2, Terms and Conditions of Employment. Sounds like setting expectations right from the start.
Exactly that. This one is all about making sure that personnel, and again, this includes relevant interested parties like contractors, are fully aware of their information security responsibilities.
Aware and accountable.
Yes, and accountable. These responsibilities need to be formally defined and communicated right there in their employment terms or contracts.
Putting it on black and white, basically, making
Yeah.
it official. What sort of responsibilities are we talking about?
Think about the basics of good security hygiene. Adhering to the organization's InfoSec policies and procedures, for one.
Okay, following the rules.
Understanding and complying with relevant legal and regulatory stuff, data protection, privacy laws, that kind of thing. And just generally knowing their part in keeping information assets secure.
And I guess these responsibilities would link back to other policies the company has.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected. For instance, the standard mentions defining the acceptable use of information and assets. That links directly to your acceptable use policy, which might fall under, say, Control 5.0 on asset use.
Ah, right. Like what you can and can't do on your work computer or with company email. Makes sense. What else needs to be in these terms?
Something really crucial: how to report information security events or weaknesses.
So if you see something suspicious, you know what to do.
Exactly. Now, the detailed procedures for incident reporting might be covered elsewhere in the 2022 standard. It used to be linked to specific clauses in the 2013 version, but the obligation for the employee to actually report issues needs to be stated in their terms of employment.
You want to build that culture where reporting is encouraged, not punished.
Precisely. Everyone needs to feel responsible for flagging potential problems.
Definitely. What about consequences? What if someone doesn't follow the rules?
Good point. The terms and conditions should also outline the disciplinary process for violations of information security policy. This connects to another control, 6.4, about disciplinary processes.
Just so people know up front that security isn't just optional advice, there are real consequences.
Right. It acts as a deterrent. Knowing there are potential consequences for negligence or deliberately ignoring policy is important.
Are there any specific security practices highlighted? Things that must be mentioned?
Yes. One key example given is the obligation to follow password management rules. That links back to Control 5.17 on authentication information.
Like using strong passwords, not sharing them.
All that good stuff. Making it a condition of employment really hammers home how vital it is.
Okay. And one last thing. What about trying to access things you shouldn't? Like snooping around?
Yeah, the terms should also cover sanctions for attempted unauthorized access to information or systems. This ties into controls about access rights like 5.18 and even supplier agreements under 5.20.
So the consequences for trying to bypass security are clear from day one.
Exactly, whether you're an employee or working via a third party.
So terms and conditions of employment really serves as that formal handshake, doesn't it? Laying out the security ground rules and making people accountable right away.
Precisely. It establishes that clear understanding, that baseline for behavior regarding the organization's information assets from the moment someone walks in the door, figuratively speaking.
Well, okay, that brings us to the first two controls in Clause 6. People controls. We covered screening and terms and conditions of employment. It's actually quite eye-opening just how vital these, well, human-focused controls are.
It really is. Even just looking at these first two shows, you managing the people side, how you screen them, how you clearly define their duties, it forms such a critical layer of your security defense.
Yeah.
If you get these right, robust screening, clear terms, everyone understands you're taking some really big steps to cut down on insider threats and just generally boost your overall security posture.
It really makes you think, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do companies ensure that what's written down on paper, in those terms and conditions, actually translates into how people behave every day, into a real, living, security-aware culture?
That's the challenge.
It's one thing to have the policy, quite another to see it in action. Definitely something for our listeners to mull over as they think about these first but really critical steps in securing their organization through its people. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.